Welcome to Meet the Ocean, a nonprofit podcast that shares the stories of our planet's saltwater ecosystems. I am your host, Paul North, and today we are joined by an expedition doctor in order to discuss the topic of hypothermia. Should you need to bundle up in order to survive, I suggest doing so now. Before we dive into the cold, though, a few updates on our educational outreach around the world. Our conservation film, Winter in Antarctica, continues to gain momentum in the film festival circuits, most recently winning Best Short Documentary at the Barcelona International Film Festival. This film is a collaboration that featured over 40 creatives and the best of the Las Vegas circus acrobatic community, all performing for their planet. Watch it, or watch it again, at winterinantarctica.com. In other news, our invertebrate-sized nonprofit was listed as a top 5 podcast by the international competition, the Webby Awards. The category was for science and education podcasts, and we share company with some of the best in the business, including Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, CNN podcasts, and the Duolingo Spanish podcast. All very exciting, even if we come in last. Meet the Ocean is a listener-supported 501c3 nonprofit, and we continue to invent creative ways to inspire the next generation of ocean advocates. You can always find more podcasts, underwater creatures, and ways to donate to our website at meettheocean.org. And now, on to our show. Now, as excited as we get about places like Antarctica and Greenland and other far-flung polar destinations, we are often talking about the wildlife and the scenery. An amazing encounter, the unforgettable sight of a sunset in the sky. But until you are standing in place, looking at these things, you forget one thing, just how cold it can be. And that is above the water. As a polar diver, I have a very specific opinion about water temperature, with subsequent opinions on what it does to the body upon entry and prolonged exposure. Dr. Andrew Peacock is many things: an explorer, a photographer, and of course, a medical professional. We have traveled the world together, sharing our expertise, and Andrew has already graced our storytelling platform with a previous episode concerning getting trapped in the sea ice on a very easy-to-pronounce Russian vessel over the holidays in Antarctica. Today, Andrew shares his thoughts on one of the greatest enemies to the human body and what happens to our physiology during that process. So bundle up and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Peacock. I'm an expedition medicine doctor from Australia, and this is Meet the Ocean Encounters. I'm currently on board the National Geographic Explorer, an expedition ship in Antarctica. And one of the crazy things that people like to do when they come down on these journeys to the far southern ocean is an event called the Polar Plunge. So just imagine stripping down to your boxer shorts or your bikini or whatever your choice of swimsuit is and jumping out of a perfectly good ship into the freezing ocean. And we're talking water temperature just below freezing. The salt in the water means that you can actually have ocean water lower than freezing. And this is what people did while I was down here on the National Geographic Explorer. A lot of excitement, a lot of concern for some people. They really felt that they needed to build up the courage to do this because they're not quite sure what to expect when they get into water that cold. And one of the things that people get worried about is hypothermia. And, will I become hypothermic? Could I possibly die if I'm in the water for too long? Hypothermia is an area of interest of mine, mainly and often from a mountain environment perspective, where people getting stuck in difficult environments high up in the mountains can certainly get hypothermic if they're not wearing the right gear and have the right protection from the elements. In the ocean, it's a little bit different, and the polar plunge, we're talking seconds in the water. This is really just a situation where hypothermia is not likely to occur, but what does occur when you leap into cold water is something called the cold shock response. And this is an involuntary gasping that is mediated or controlled or initiated by the skin receptors, the cold skin receptors that tell your body urgently that you have gone into an environment that, hey, this is not right. This is freezing cold, and your involuntary response to that situation is to gasp uncontrollably. And this is where people run into trouble in cold water. If you jump into or fall into freezing water and this involuntary response occurs, you can drown simply because of this involuntary gasping reflex. And that's where life jackets are so important for anyone boating or in any kind of ship environment, in case something unfortunate happens like that. So a life jacket will keep you afloat, obviously, and gasping, therefore, won't fill your lungs full of water. But we observed this very clearly in everyone who jumped in the water with the polar plunge. I jumped in, and despite knowing exactly what that response is, it can be hard to bring some voluntary control over that gasping. But the important thing for anyone who ever finds themselves in this situation is to understand that actually this response does settle down. In a minute or two, your breathing will come under control, and now you've got time to do something about the situation. What can you do and how long you have to do it depends a little bit on the environment, obviously, and how cold the water actually is. But in a freezing water environment like the one we saw, you've probably got about 10 minutes to make some sort of activity to get yourself out of the water and into a better situation. After 10 minutes have gone by, your muscles will start cramping and become not usable, and now you don't have the ability to help yourself. So that's where things can become really difficult if you don't have a life jacket on. If you have a life jacket on, after 10 minutes, maybe you can't do anything much to help yourself, but you've probably got about an hour in total in water, even that cold, before the hypothermic responses start to cause a real problem and where you may actually die. So hypothermia will occur progressively over the next 50 minutes or so, and initially your blood will be shunted away from the periphery, from your fingers and toes, as your body makes an effort to keep all of the important organs warm. So the smooth muscle that is around the peripheral arterioles and blood vessels will constrict and preferentially keep blood in your core. But even then, eventually that system will fail, and progressively as your body temperature drops, you become essentially unconscious over a period of time. So the idea is 10 minutes in freezing water, you can do something about it. You need to have a life jacket on. And the polar plungers that we saw had a great time, lots of fun, just a few seconds in the water, a bit of a shock, some gasping, and then reaching for the hands of the expedition staff to pull them out of the water. So a fun event, and one that isn't of any great concern, but I guess just a reminder of this interesting physiological occurrence that actually plays an important part in what can go wrong in an ocean environment if you end up in really cold water.
Meet the Ocean is produced by Paul North and Andrew Gettings, with sound design by me, Kelsey Anderson. We are a listener-supported nonprofit. You can find more podcasts, underwater creatures, and ways to donate to our educational outreach on our website, meettheocean.org. Subscribe to our podcast to never miss an episode. Support us on Patreon, and please rate and review us on whichever platform you choose to listen. Until next time, may the salt water be with you.
Meet the ocean.